It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I'm Geoff Arbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure, that you can catch each Wednesday at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. Sometimes you just need to watch a cheapo little 80s sci-fi horror movie, and that's what we have here. Now, if you want to know exactly what we're dealing with for this week's movie, just know that there are multiple titles that this movie goes by. Originally, this 1986 schlockfest was named The Falling. In fact, the Blu-ray that I have from Shout Factory has that on the movie itself, The Falling. However, somewhere along the way, it was also released as Mutant 2. But what was Mutant 1? Well, Mutant was a 1984 horror film made by John Cardos, or Bud Cardos to people in the know. Cardos made the 1977 creepy crawly Shatner flick, Kingdom of the Spiders. But Mutant wasn't even that movie's original title. That was its home video title, and that's a whole other rabbit hole. Anyway, so it was filmed originally as The Falling, but then got released under the title Mutant 2 in some places. But my Blu-ray box, now the movie on the Blu-ray says The Falling, but my Blu-ray box says Alien Predators, plural. But IMDb calls it Alien Predator, singular. Boy, that's when you know you got a good one on the hook there, my friends. But anyway, there are a trio of mildly recognizable people in this movie. This film was made in Spain and starred three Americans on holiday. The first of those three Americans is played by Dennis Christopher. Now, Christopher's big breakout was in 1979's Breaking Away, about a group of local Bloomington, Indiana kids who compete in the annual Little 500 bicycle race. Then, in 1980, he appeared as Eric in Fade to Black, a wonderful slasher film. Then, in 1981, he appeared in the Best Picture Oscar winner for that year, Chariots of Fire. In that, he played American Olympian Charlie Paddock. And while he continued to work in films into the 21st century, most of his work after Chariots of Fire was on TV in several guest spots. However, in 1990, he did appear in the television miniseries version of Stephen King's It as Eddie, one of our protagonist members of The Losers. Next, we have Lynn Holly Johnson. Now, we've talked about Johnson before, but she was a professional figure skater as part of the Ice Capades. And I hadn't thought about the Ice Capades in a really long time. Probably the reason why is that it folded in 1997. But I remember the commercials for the touring performances, and they were relatively popular for a long time, even as it was going into decline in its final decade of operation. But long before it went away, Johnson transitioned to acting with 1978's Ice Castles, a smushy romance drama in which she plays a figure skater who is blinded and struggles her way back onto the ice with her partner helping her along the way. Now, that rolled into two high-profile roles at the beginning of the 80s. First was as the lead in Disney's horror film The Watcher in the Woods with Carol Baker and Bette Davis. That's where we know Lynn Holly Johnson from on this show. But her biggest role was as the boy-crazy figure skating protege sponsored by a nefarious benefactor in the James Bond film For Your Eyes Only. Now, the most interesting member of this cast is Martin Hewitt. Now, Hewitt is kind of one of those guys who scored a high-profile leading role in a movie that could have made him a massive star right at the beginning of his career. But the quality of the film and all the tumultuous conversation around it likely wrecked any chance of a major career for him. That high-profile movie he scored the lead in was 1981's Endless Love with Brooke Shields. Now, Endless Love was a fairly popular book from 1979 about young, obsessive love between two teenagers. Hewitt beat out a reported 5,000 young actors to play the role of David Axelrod. These actors included the likes of Tom Cruise, who did end up making his film debut anyway in that movie as a different character, and Timothy Hutton, who had just recently become the youngest actor to ever win the Best Supporting Actor award at the Oscars for Ordinary People. So when you went out over that many possible contenders and the quality of contenders that there was, you would think that it would end up becoming a massive opportunity for you. However, it turned out to be something of a nightmare for Hewitt. The book was generally well received upon release, but Endless Love has been known for 43 years as being a really bad movie, to the exception of its music. Most of the criticism was laid at the feet of two things: the narrative story and Hewitt being ill cast and having not much chemistry with Brooke Shields. And because Hewitt would get most of the derision, it's something that really, honestly, Hewitt's career never really recovered from. But enough about that. What's Alien Predator, Alien Predators, Mutant 2, or The Falling? Whichever one you want to call it. What's that all about? Well, at the start, we get a little bit of a backstory about Skylab. Yeah, ever heard of Skylab? That was the first space station launched long before the International Space Station was. It was set up for people to spend an allotted amount of time in space to perform experiments in an environment that could not be done on Earth. It was launched in 1973 and only operated for about 6 months. By 1979, its use was over and the orbit decayed until it burned up in Earth's atmosphere. Now, this movie is positing the idea that whole chunks of Skylab landed in Duarte, Spain. And 5 years later, some grazing cattle in Spain are surprised when one of their numbers starts to bleed from its face. And while we don't exactly see what happens, it sounds pretty gross, whatever it is. Then we meet Damon, played by Dennis Christopher, Michael, played by Martin Hewitt, and Samantha, played by Lynn Holly Johnson. These three are pretty close. Michael and Damon are best friends from long ago. They were kids growing up together. Samantha was kind of a tag along on this vacation trip in their RV across Spain. She's kind of flighty and super excited to have been asked to join them on the trip. She talks about, I feel like I'm one of the boys now and all of that stuff. Exactly what her relationship is to both of these guys at first is pretty unclear at the onset. Seems like it was somebody that maybe Michael knew at college or in school or something and convinced Damon to allow her to join them. But whatever their relationship is, she is kind of flirty with them, and she does kiss both of them when we first see the three of them interacting together. Now, back where that cow got torn apart by whatever it is that happened, wild dogs are starting to feast on the guts of the animal, but then something from inside the animal feeds on one of the dogs. The three camping Americans are forced off the road by the body of the dead animal and the surviving dog that was kind of freaking out when its buddy dog ended up getting eaten by something that it was eating. Michael investigates only to find gooey muck on the road. Now they hear a noise that doesn't sound human, so they run back to the camper to get the hell out of there. And the three of them arrive in the small village of Duarte. Now the following day, two men, Captain Wells and Dr. Tracer, meet in Duarte to discuss something that the captain found and that Tracer needs to be brought in to study or to figure out what to do with it. So these two guys go to a hotel room where a third guy is dead in bed with a bizarre growth on his throat. Wells was sent to Duarte to find out why communications were shut off between NASA and this research facility that's located just outside of town. As the doctor messes around with the guy's growth on his neck, it begins to wiggle and move, and then, after being lanced, it spits some goop out at Wells. Later, these guys go to the NASA research lab, and find it abandoned. And in the lower level of the facility, they find that a hatch is remaining open and the specimens kept inside are missing. Tracer then reveals to Wells that he's been exposed to the microbes that hitched a ride back from Skylab when that guy in the hotel gooped on him. Wells kills himself, but when he does so, whatever the monster was inside him, created by the microbes, begins to tear its way out of him. In the town restaurant, Michael and Samantha have a strange interaction with the waitress there. And Damon, who was sent out to find parts for the camper that's breaking down on them, also had a weird interaction with another local at the car parts shop. When the waitress returns, her hair has gotten pretty crazy and her nose is bleeding all over the check that she slammed down onto the table. When leaving the diner, Sam is nearly hit by a large truck. It looked like an army truck, but actually it's carrying barrels of gasoline. But later, when she gets mad at the two guys, she decides to go back to town to do some grocery shopping and just get away from them for a bit. There, she's attacked by a guy in a creepy mask with blood trickling out from underneath it. That heavy-duty truck with the gas canisters or the barrels of gas on the back or whatever, it begins stalking her, and it ends up squishing the guy attacking her before stalking Sam specifically. And she's snatched up by Tracer, who forces her by gunpoint to drive to the hotel so that he can begin gathering what he needs to try to develop a cure for all of this. Hearing her on the CB radio, Damon decides to ask to borrow the car of a family camping near them to go and save Sam, only to discover a ghastly sight of the family's murder. Tracer contacts NASA to get help, and Sam slinks away to find a place to hide and goes into the room with the guy that gooped on Wells previously. Something crawls out of the guy's body and tries to attack her, but she barely gets away. Damon and Michael arrive at the hotel, and Tracer shows them where all the townspeople are. They are creating a barricade on the only road in and out of Duarte. In time, the infected will finish them off, and then whatever they're hosting inside their bodies will burst out of them and spread across Europe in pretty short order. Tracer explains how the infection will take over people, use the human DNA to take what it needs to form into a killing machine, and then after 48 hours, it expels itself from the host. Tracer needs materials to make that cure, so Michael agrees to return to the NASA compound alone to get one of the canisters of stuff from Skylab to make that cure. Down in the lower levels, he has to fight off the monster that grew inside Wells, and he barely escapes before the NASA compound self-destructs. Michael returns with the canister, and Tracer begins to dish out the antidote, and he gives the Americans the antidote, but it's revealed that Tracer's already infected and that F-14s are flying overhead to napalm the hell out of the town. The three travelers hightail it as far away as they can before the jets arrive. After smashing through the barricade, Michael, Damon, and Sam get out of Duarte. Now, down the road a ways, they stop for gasoline, and the station's attendant starts convulsing, and eventually a little monster flies out of his face and onto the front of the camper, and then gets run over by Damon driving away to safety. But, again, they are not out of the woods yet. They are about 20 miles away from Madrid when we start to notice that Damon's nose is bleeding. So let's talk about the three things that I like about this little sci-fi horror movie that grossed only $2,500 at box offices upon release. Yeah, you heard that right. It only made $2,500 in theaters. However, I will say I think this movie probably ended up doing really well on home video and especially on cable, and then probably also did pretty well being sold as like late night movie fodder on broadcast networks. But first, I actually kind of like how silly the script is for this movie in terms of how Michael, Samantha, and Damon are written. They are full of shtick. What's weird is that it kind of makes them a little more realistic because, trust me, I've been in many situations at the store or somewhere else in public or having to fight off face monsters that burst out of people's heads or whatever. And I've seen a lot of young friends just doing young friend stuff, and they're always doing shtick. And it's as if they're performing for everyone else around them. And it's never funny to me. I never find it endearing. That said, I kind of do like it in this movie. I think it is the sort of realism of how I've seen people act like these characters do, but in real life. I wouldn't want to be around that in the real world necessarily, especially some of the stuff that Dennis Christopher does in this movie. Holy cow. But in a movie about aliens who hitched a ride on the wreckage of Skylab, who then take over the bodies of people and turn them into monsters, I feel like it livens things up a little bit. Even though this movie is made with 3 American leads in it, there is a kind of charm to it through these main characters. It's almost like they are making a movie that is supposed to pass as an American movie, even though, I mean, it is already being made in Spain. So it really does kind of have that feeling of a European movie trying to pass itself as a European movie. I don't really know how to explain it. Now, it is made by Americans though. So it is kind of interesting that it comes across that way as well. But, it does, there's just a charm to this movie, and the dialogue even comes off as almost sounding like there wasn't really even a full script and there was a lot of ad lib or making stuff up on the fly before the cameras roll. I don't know. I don't want that for many movies, but in this movie, it actually kind of works. Second, I like the idea that there's a deeper lore going on here. It's explained that Apollo 14 discovered some alien microbes that were dormant. They were then sent to Skylab for study. However, when Skylab crashed, these spores or these microbes basically were no longer dormant and escaped. I like the idea that the alien threat is a microbe. It's not a monster like an alien that has little babies that are grown inside the host. It's a spore or a microscopic threat, which is kind of more of a realistic type of alien threat. But this movie is often described as kind of a combination of the Andromeda strain and Alien. But instead of the facehuggers from Alien impregnating people to have little monsters burst out of them, you get infected by coming into contact with the blood or the goop of the infected person. But still, a little alien is growing inside of the infected person. It's not, I mean, and it also kind of acts like one of those zombie viruses that you sometimes hear about, like in jungles and stuff where it takes over bugs. It ends up kind of piloting the people as opposed to, or kind of possessing them or kind of turning them into like rage monsters. So not only do you have to deal with the people going crazy, but then there's going to be a monster that bursts out of their face, once it's done gestating. It's kind of a nice change of pace. It's an added threat to it that, just how easy it is to come in contact with a viral or microbial sort of thing. Now, lastly, I mentioned earlier that Martin Hewitt's career was basically derailed right away with Endless Love. However, in this movie, I think he's actually fantastic. There's this whole story woven into the movie in which Michael, which is his character, has fallen in love with Sam, but Damon is also sweet on her. But while Dennis Christopher's Damon is kind of a goofy, happy-go-lucky guy, Michael is a lot cooler, but doesn't force that coolness about him. He's got pretty good chemistry too with Lynn Holly Johnson. And as much as I think the 3 lead stars are likable and do work well off of each other, you get the impression that these 3 people actually like each other. But it's Martin Hewitt that kind of takes the cake in terms of being the most likable. And that's even including a very sweet Lynn Holly Johnson. Hell, is there anything she's ever done in which she isn't super likable? But Hewitt works very well with her and turns out to be my favorite performance in this whole movie. And his character is somebody that I find myself rooting for. But that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday afternoon at FilmSeizure.com. Don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Threads, Instagram, and Blue Sky. You can also subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Film Seizure podcast and Monster Mondays at your favorite podcast providers as well as YouTube. You can also check out my website, bmovieanima.com, to read new reviews every Friday morning. Next time, I stick with the 80s with another small film that has a title that's just simply fun to say. So join me as we go into a Colorado silver mine to discover the Boogans. Until next week, stay spooky.